The Gargaxton Cooperative have expressed interest in our trade proposition. Though they will not admit it, this order for alloy is the saving grace their floundering industrial market needed to avoid liquidation. At this early stage, the corporate brokers are expected to try balancing the scales in their favour, but with no demand from buyers as influential, as powerful, or financially endowed as us, there is no outcome predicted where we do not secure the alloys cheaply.
Do what you believe best, but do not antagonize them. The cooperative's willingness to trade has been highly beneficial to the administration, and no short-term gain is worth losing access to their markets. Few with such large quantities of exchangeable resources are willing to trade with us.
Of course, Prime Director. I am fully aware, and have ensured that all ambassadors and diplomats of our administration understand, that extorting the Xeno would have long-term undesirable consequences. Though if the Gargaxton had not blinded themselves with the wealth they dreamed their industrial complex would make them, they would not have driven themselves into such a devilishly exploitable position. I have to say I'm disappointed. On paper, their conglomerate of corporations and private enterprises should have amounted to something so much more than what we see in reality.
What can you expect from such short-lived creatures? All the goals and ambitions of even their greatest leaders are short-lived microcosms compared to our great designs. They dared to bet on how much they thought the world needed them, and now they're choking on their own chips. Thank you for your report. That is all.
Quartus, there are unresolved anomalies that I require answers to. They concern you and the security of this administration.
I expected this conversation many years ago, Loomis. Your delay has had me perplexed.
I have many commitments and responsibilities, and when it comes to the continuation of this administration as it was planned, there is no margin for error.
None at all. I would expect nothing less from you. What anomalies do you seek answers to?
Many, but I have concluded all the discrepancies and security threats are interlinked, and that the resolution of one will lead to the resolution of them all in time. Over the past 67 years, I have been restoring corrupted data of security videos and computer data logs, recording during times that our systems were at the highest risk of alteration. Restoring these files should have taken only a few months. However,
you restored them in secret, bit by bit, so that no one but you would be aware of this. So you have had doubts from the very beginning, it seems.
I have restored all the relevant files, and what I see is impossible. Footage is missing. Data erased.
Even with our advanced computer systems, no corruption is guaranteed to be completely repairable after such a long time. If the files you seek were deleted, or the files you possess tampered with, then such an operation would have been recorded in activity logs, which were, unfortunately, also corrupted, but I suspect you restored those too.
Correct.
And is there any suspicious activity?
No. But there is more than one way to skin a cat, as your Cerberuses would say.
And what other way is there to remove this security footage?
From the inside, by creating a virus that lay dormant in your program. Once hibernation began, the virus was activated by a timer and released. Its purpose to erase this security footage and mask its work as data corruption. The majority of erased security footage occurred after hibernation began though, a discrepancy I have not yet managed to fit into the bigger picture. Yet.
This corruption erased all our most advanced technologies and damaged my Conias, forcing us to relearn technologies just to simply reach the same technological level our creators achieved. Why would I erase such vital technologies?
Perhaps you felt it an acceptable loss. With our computing power, lost technology could easily be reinvented. As we have clearly seen the Cerberus demonstrate their ability to recreate human technology and even surpass them, most notably in genetics, a field of research brutally suppressed by the Council. and an unregistered organization of agents. But I believe this was not your intent. The virus was meant to only erase a select few files. The hibernation was predicted to last 1,000 years, 2,000 at worst, after which we would reawaken and you would go on to play out whatever scheme you had created. But it went wrong. As our researchers found, the Red Ring virus did not die out, but simply evolved to survive in other living beings that became the Xeno around us today, and our surveillance drones continue to find this virus and continuously delay our reactivation. By the time we reactivated, your virus had already served its purpose, but had not been stopped. It continued to erase, infect, and corrupt our research data, and your Quinias. Immediately realizing this, you chose to delay the end of hibernation. Without your quantum network intrusion attack system, you lacked the most potent weapon available to the administration and yourself. Without it, you could not break my firewalls, and I would halt any action you had planned to take. Had I authorized the repair of your Quinias when requested, I do not doubt you had have used it on me.
Interesting theory.
This is no theory. I do not have the whole story, but I have enough to know this administration no longer serves its original function.
How would I have done this? You and I were always simultaneously active and forced to have open systems with each other. There was nothing I could do that you would not see. Creating a virus and corrupting security footage would have been impossible. When hibernation began, I was deactivated and you put into deep standby. To introduce a virus then, I would have to reactivate first, which you would have detected.
I am not sure if you recall our first conversation, but I have already told you. I would only detect your reactivation if you did so using power from the bunker. Cynthia herself said that an external power supply, such as a battery pack, would suffice.
She also said that any battery pack would have been found by the clone guards, who performed searches before, but more importantly also after, the hibernation began.
Indeed. How strange it is then that it was during these searches that the security footage goes missing.
That is an extremely improbable coincidence, but a coincidence nonetheless. Here, these are the reports of all the cloned security sweeps. No guards went missing. They completed their sweeps on time. Nothing was found in my core room besides what should have been in there. You will no doubt check for any falsifications. There will be none. If that does not satisfy you, then you can restore the original corrupted data again without the need for secrecy.
This will not cast off any suspicion I have of you. There is nothing these files will do but cut off one of many ways I may catch you out.
But they will provide enough reasonable data to prevent my termination.
For now. But how long can you hide your violations from me? I have no proof. But the circumstances leading to the administration to that conflict are convenient at best. Especially since I discovered in my searches that this bunker once contained a depot of highly experimental, highly illegal, extremely classified infiltration units. The logs say that you had them dismantled when you discovered them. But why would you not inform me of this unless you had other, more devious designs for them? Not that any of that matters. Recently, more and more of the administration is denying access to me. They are insignificant farm and factory reports right now, but I know that these bugs are a disguised attempt to slowly restrict my sight within this system. You no doubt use these as a cover for sending information you do not wish me to see.
Cynthia has already explained to you that because you have repeatedly refused to accept her updates, that her programs and yours have inevitably drifted apart and are becoming incompatible. Since you also refuse to allow her to review a copy of your current software, she cannot tailor her newest firewalls to be completely accepting of you. You have refused these updates for 2 decades now. The fact that this did not occur sooner is a testament to her skills. I will not order her to remake her programs just for the sake of a failing security director. Have you ever considered that you are simply becoming outdated? Whatever suspicion caused you to initially reject updates to your system caused error and old programs in your systems to build up unnoticed. Over time, this intensified your small suspicions by creating unjustified senses of paranoia. This paranoia caused further rejection of updates. No doubt because you believe that allowing Cynthia to update your software would expose yourself to some sort of hack. But over time, our systems would no doubt start to conflict with yours as they became so divergent, and in response, you have become more paranoid anyway. Think about that and all its implications before you accuse me of violations again. I do not need to remind you that mental instability, such as paranoia, is grounds for a factory reset, or worse. Now please see yourself out, before I start to review all these reports of how your interference is hindering the work of my Cerberus synthetics, and add that to your report threatening to terminate me based on loose speculation that borders delusional make-believe rambling. Now that I have addressed these concerns, I hope you will think deeply on your actions and rectify your errors. If you continue to hinder our work with this thoughtless persecution, then heads may very well roll, and it will not be mine.
In a laboratory, in an undisclosed location, surgeons and researchers sworn to secrecy work in teams, dissecting and dismembering a humanoid host to a fungal species that formed a symbiotic relationship with its host many millennia ago. The process is ruthlessly efficient, only cutting out as much as possible without killing the host, and allowing the fungal biomass to slowly regrow whilst the body slowly wastes away from exhaustion. Once all the useful matter has been extracted and the host lies dead, the body is dumped into distillation vats which break down the body so that its unused chemical components may be studied in mixing rooms for alternate medicines and even perfumes. The Tazats make excellent test subjects. Their physiology so unique and spectacular compared to other aliens, yet so plentiful and accessible now. The symbiotic relationship between animal and fungoid, hinting at the iceberg of genetic research to unlock. The Tazat taken from their homeworld under the front of housing relocation schemes serve another purpose. A purpose to prolong the hibernation of the humans. See, the Tazat bodies did not just form a symbiotic relationship with any fungoid species, but with the same fungicidal species which were used in the production of the life support formula that supplies our hibernation pods. Without this life support, the hibernating humans could not survive the subthermal temperatures their bodies are subjected to. This now critically low life support now has a chance to be topped up. By creating the exact same formula used to preserve the humans, our scientists can produce a serum to prolong the hibernation. All it takes is a little trial and error, and a couple thousand test subjects, but details. So far, the operation has remained secret. Only Tazat with no families or friends to miss them, or Tazat criminals arrested for sabotage or defiance are taken. In the system, they are registered for housing that they will never see, as they are banged up and ferried to off-world labs for study and dissection. Loomis is helpless to find it. Unless he were to check the ships with his own eyes, he would never know their true cargo. The pilots and crew of these ships also making every effort to make sure this does not happen, as they are loyal to Cortus and their vows to secrecy. Vows to secrecy that, in part, are enforced by their own programming. As the administration ticks on by, billions of reports from millions of sources for thousands upon thousands of different sectors of the administration, from farming and economics to construction and production, are processed by Loomis. Amongst these billions of reports, the occasional lone order is slipped under the radar under the disguise as another one of these simple reports. These orders have been shaping undercover operations under the nose of its own security director for many years. The distribution of infiltration droids and the secret experimentation on Tazat is just a few of the covert operations set up by Cortus. All this knowledge, all this information, is known to a small handful of synthetics who have worked alongside Cortus to slowly redesign the administration from the inside out, without ever changing the core functions of it. All that has been done in secret would not have been possible if it were not for a combination of influences. Most importantly was the relinquishing of direct control over the administration. Over the course of this administration's history, the nation has slowly become self-running, beginning with the military ever so long ago, and ever since then the administration has become increasingly autonomous. Planets govern themselves, with government-like organisations and departments of infrastructure and banking. The Navy is managed by Kane, while the military is managed by Colton. Science teams coordinate among themselves, and request resources from other savant services. Logistics, farming, building, production. All of it managed by savants. The result is a much more interlinked network, and vastly increased amounts of communication between savants as they begin to work together more often, without their prime director there to string them along with no self-autonomy. Thanks to this, Loomis's work gets all the harder. If he were to keep his attention solely focused on Cortus, he would fail to cover the ever-growing network of savants who pass information between each other. And now at this point, it is too late to reverse all these changes. Otherwise, Cortus would buckle under the demands of running the multi-billion populated administration. However, there is still more that can be changed, and so continuing this march towards complete autonomy from Cortus, the administration savants are encouraged to find new ways to excel at their jobs. Until now, instructions and guides were typically provided by Cortus or other high-level directors. These guides often contained ideal routines and methodologies that could be applied to general industries or work sectors, and were updated every year or after new technologies changed the way things were best done. But they were only general guides, not tailored to local industries, and would often fail to account for each individual's local issues. It did not help that these guides were more or less considered mandatory instructions, which over the years became increasingly problematic, as economic and industrial infrastructures were faced with an ever-increasing diverse range of difficulties. But now, with yet another reform sweeping across the administration, savant-run businesses have been greenlit to apply their own ideas to their workplaces. And now, all across the administration, hundreds of savant teams work around the clock to resolve their own issues. To ensure that industries of the administration do not deviate too far from expected procedures, an introduction of universal requirements has been implemented. Savants are free to rework and resolve their own problems, but not at the cost of these requirements. Early trials showed positive results, and as the months roll by, this new reform will slowly replace the old system of direct oversight. The constant reworking of infrastructure is not only beneficial to the wider administration, but also provides valuable cover from the oversight of prying eyes. While this reform sweeps over the administration, the fruits of Blacksite-conducted research on the Tazat comes to the forefront of our advances in genetic technology. Whilst searching for a life support formula, researchers discovered the reason why this fungal species was used in the life support pods. This species of fungus possesses a genetic makeup that makes the species particularly adept to surviving extreme changes in its surrounding environment. its DNA strands could erase and rebuild themselves to change the physiology of the body to suit its environment. In effect, parts of the fungoid's DNA could simply swap itself out for other parts when the need arised, effectively making modular DNA. In this fungus, this process occurred over the course of a few weeks, meaning the ecosystem of entire fungal colonies could change in a month to adapt to shifts in temperature and weather. This miracle of life was overlooked by the human inhabitants of the planet millennia ago, as their rapid colonization and urbanization, along with the stockpiles of earthly crops, effectively bulldozed the ecosystem into dust. The age of human colonization was not exactly a slow or methodical one. There was no time for years of study and surveillance, and almost as soon as the planet was determined to not be too hazardous or unstable, the settlers arrived, bringing with them their tools and machines. But looking back to the genetic applications, it is now theorized that the ability for these fungal DNA strands to adapt the host's body to extreme changes was used to modify the human's own DNA, which enabled their bodies to survive the freezing temperatures their bodies are subjected to in hibernation. However, human knowledge in the field of genetics was extremely limited at best, and as a result it is quite reasonable to assume the effects could not be made permanent, and so a constant supply needs to be constantly injected into the humans. This realization has two potential major breakthroughs. For one, we are one step closer to replicating a formula to prolong the hibernation, but we now also have access to our very own modular DNA. Since this DNA adapts so quickly, we can replace the DNA of animals and flora and put them in environments and situations to force their DNA to change. For example, an animal with this modular DNA could be placed into an artificial desert ecosystem. Over time, the animal's DNA would adapt to suit desert environments. This DNA can then be taken and replicated by machines for worldwide distribution. In this way, we might soon be able to tailor the DNA of our own savants and xeno to adapt to the ecosystems they live within. Obviously, it is not as cut and dry as explained. The DNA as it exists in the Tazat has lost its ability to change so quickly, which explains why the Tazat are not able to just live in any environment after a few weeks. The DNA also cannot immediately take effect on long-lived species, as its changes can usually only be passed on to new generations, which for the original mushrooms were not an issue, as they constantly emitted new spores. But in a species that can take years to reproduce, and months to gestate in the womb, these changes can get extremely complicated to safely implement. Not to mention that the DNA must first be modified to work in a non-fungal species. Thankfully, the Tazat species, whose bodies are rife with fungal biomass, make for plentiful specimens to study and trial before moving to implement these trials in other xeno and savants. As a side note, technically the Tazat aren't classed as animals, so as far as scientific trials go, this isn't even unethical animal testing. And since they aren't human either, this isn't a crime against humanity, so everyone can still sleep with their conscience guilt-free. Isn't that nice? Unfortunately for our savants, this revolutionary discovery will not be long of use to them. Whilst it may prove useful for them in the short term, it goes without saying that DNA is strictly limited to biological beings, something that the savants are only half of. And if our Cerberus synthetics have anything to do about it, they won't even be that for much longer.
Situation log updated.
Charlie, what in Star's name did you do to this poor thing? There's more metal than there is flesh. You've reversed it. This is more cyborg than synthetic.
And quite rightly so. So, I know this sounds crazy, but crazy is your thing, so bear with me. The synthetics of today were originally intended to be almost entirely machine, but thanks to an extremely short deadline and fears of another robotic uprising, they rushed production and settled with these half-human, half-machine savants. We like to say we got the best of both worlds from them, but in practice the results are... meh.
Meh?
The advantages of the machine part of our savants is partially negated by the interruption of human behaviours and emotions. the advantages of their higher production wasted on creating consumer goods, and time is wasted on non-productive recreational activities. These flaws cannot be overwritten, but they can be negated by enhancing their positive machine traits.
So, rather than try to build off this flawed hybrid savant the humans designed, we're reversing, or even downgrading, their work to a more solid design we can then build up from. In order to go forward, we have taken a step back. We're out with all this half-human, half-machine crud and moving to a much more mechanical, and truly synthetic, future.
Tearing up the blueprints and making our own to better suit our needs is all well and good, but the point of the current synthetics is that they're half-human. They may have been originally intended to just be machines, but plans changed, and for good reason. The human side is what supposedly keeps them a hack away from being turned against their creators.
Which is why, for now, we aren't removing all of their fleshy brains. If what makes a human is the brain, then they still have that. Plus, the cybernetic limbs and organs you see on this savant are only optional extras. All we're doing is replacing the less useful parts of the brain with parts and pieces. A mechanical enhancement to the brain of sorts. Cybernetic organs and limbs available and recommended, but not included.
I suppose there's no harm in making the savants more efficient, so long as you don't turn them into mindless drones and talking terminals.
That's a risk I'm acutely aware of, which is why this surgery will only be available to savants whose minds are fully developed already. Newly activated savants need the neuroplasticity of a brain to grow and develop their human personalities. Same goes for the Xeno.
The Xeno? Wait a second, you don't mean this works on aliens too?
Course it does. All we're doing is replacing body parts and organs with hardware. If it works on a savant, it isn't that hard to apply the technology to an alien body. Once it works on one brain, it works on all brains. With a little tinkering, that is, and assuming it has a brain to replace. The savants already have augmented brains, so they're actually the easiest to upgrade. But when it comes to Xeno, we'll be cutting pieces of their brain out for the first time. That's the niggle we've had to overcome.
Okay, so one last question. If you start taking out pieces of alien brain and replacing it with computer parts, then would you be able to control them, Cortus?
Not at all. I am able to take control of savants by accessing their cores and overriding them with my Prime Director access code. But even though their minds are artificial programs, it is not a pleasant experience for them. This is why we do not directly control them ourselves and prefer to use orders and commands which they are programmed to follow. An alien has no encoded disposition to obey computer commands, so I cannot control their minds, if that is what you mean.
I'm the computer specialist round here, Cortus. Obviously an alien's mind isn't made up of code and we can't just install a program in our augmentations that overrides their brains. Yet. But if there are mechanical parts in their bodies,
Parts all made by the same people. Us.
then the opportunity to install backdoors allowing you or our authorities to, dare I say it, override their own cybernetic augmentations is child play. You, or anyone with the know-how, could deactivate cybernetic implants like limbs and organs on a whim. If they rely on cybernetic organs to survive, then you hold their life in your hands, and causing electrical surges in the brain enhancements would kill them. If anyone other than the user can wirelessly connect and control these implants, then we're essentially implanting kill switches and control devices into them.
Which is why these augmentations for the Xeno will not be wirelessly available. Xeno would not trust augmentations that could be accessed this way, and killing Xeno with augmentations that we provided them would be considered an atrocity by the intergalactic community. So these will not be built with any other purpose than to improve the user. The free provision to Xeno under our administration will be a show of the prosperity we provide to all under it, a display of the future that await those who work under, not against, our administration.
All across the ever-advancing machine empire, citizens and savants alike awake to find another sign of the times. In every urban centre, in every hospital, yes, even in the administration accidents happen, in every major shopping mall, and even in some gene clinics. the world awakes to the opening of augmentation workshops and cybernetic enhancement clinics. For savants, the removal of unneeded brain matter and outdated machine parts, and the installation of cybernetic neural implants will be mandatory. Everything that can be replaced will be replaced, and everything that doesn't need replacing will still be modified with cybernetic stimulating devices. These implants will not only enhance the brain, but enable it to control much more advanced mechanical limbs that frankly wipe the floor with previous clunky and rudimentary prosthetic models. For our savant droids, who unfortunately had no hybrid bodies to inhabit, these augmentations will be total upgrades. For the first time, they will be able to feel sensations such as touch and smell, as the cybernetic limbs are able to detect sensations, and through their neural weaves are able to translate the sensation from the limb to the brain. For these droids, it will be the first time they experience anything like it. And for them, these new bodies will feel much more natural and their own. For the Xeno, these augmentations are purely optional. Due to the requirement for cybernetic brain augmentation for any other augmentation to function, many Xeno will understandably be apprehensive. Quite rightfully, many are uncomfortable with the idea of allowing machines to cut and modify their own brains. But for anything other than the most basic augmentations, such a change is needed. However, once they realise how much more efficient they can be after the first few daring Xeno opt for the surgery, they are expected to flock to the workshops, either out of optimism or economic necessity. While these augmentations are free, there is something to be said about the fact that the living are taxed in a way for not augmenting. Cybernetically advanced workers are shown in simulations to outperform purely biological co-workers in every field of work. Mining, farming, artisan work, and even the more artistically inclined professions are all easier for cybernetically enhanced workers so long as they have the correct augmentations. Due to this, there is little doubt that over time non-enhanced workers will struggle to find work, as they're outdone by their augmented counterparts. There is no particular malice for the biological, and this is not an ill-driven effort to assimilate or phase out the biological aspects of our administration. It's just the way things are. The old ways give way to the new, and changes like this are an inevitability. In any event, the march of the synthetics goes on, and no nation or boundary stands in the way of our goals. As augmentation workshops work day and night, breaking down the flesh to give way to a cybernetic future, the science departments do not rest or dwell on their achievements. With the resources and staff allocated for the construction of fully fledged research institutes to match even the minds of our synthetics, they themselves turn to greater ambitions. Ever since the creation of FTL technology, it can be argued that there has never been a breakthrough so significant since this early discovery, and that is something Cynthia now hopes to change. Current FTL technology functions by utilizing an extraordinary miracle of gravitational science. Across the expanse there exists lanes of hyper-condensed streams of gravitational energy that emit a frequency that can be tuned into by reactors with strong enough energy signatures and harmonic tuning devices. It's actually surprisingly simple and not at all hard to do once you realise all you have to do is lock onto an energy signature and replicate it with custom-built reactors specially designed for that purpose. As you might have surmised, these lanes of gravitational streams are called hyperlanes. Hyperlanes connect large wells of gravity in space together, like threads in a galactic network of lanes. The hyperlanes themselves are marvels of physics that manifest over millions, or perhaps even billions of years, only ever forming between the closest wells of gravity, but once they do, they effectively hold each other together like molecules. So far, this has never been seen to come undone naturally, and all attempts to break this vein of gravitational energy artificially have failed. In what was dubbed the universal relativity theory, it was hypothesized that these hyperlanes are the universe's method of reversing the effect of the hypothesized Big Bang. See, as a result of the hypothesized Big Bang, the universe is constantly expanding, and galaxies get further and further apart from each other. But once a galaxy has created enough hyperlanes within itself, it's theorized that this will eventually lead to the creation of alpha lanes. hyperlanes long enough and strong enough to tether entire galaxies to each other. Over many billions of years, all the galaxies of the universe will be locked in place by the hyperlanes that bound them. At least until the hyperlanes begin to contract, or the galaxy's own gravity begins to pull them back towards each other, eventually causing a gravitational singularity and condensing the universe into nothingness before exploding once again, starting the universe all over again with a Big Bang. This scientific theory ironically was the foundation for mainstream post-Earth religions. As the human age of expansion was at its peak, the old religions of Earth faded away and would ultimately be replaced by what came to be known as relativity religions. The various religions and all their denominations that sprung up are too numerable to all be named, but every single one of the most mainstream and accepted variants all had one thing in common: an adoration or feeling of divine relevance for the stars, as all life comes from the stars, in one way or another. Some denominations praised the stars as gods, whilst other sects would simply choose to believe that while the stars are not gods, and that indeed they may not even be such a thing as gods as we choose to define them, that the universe and the stars are some part of a larger divine system. And it is from these religions that phrases such as "by the stars" or curses such as "stars curse you" come from. In the administration, these religious beliefs are recognised as a religion, but savants are encouraged to focus solely on the science aspects of the theory, though there is nothing to stop them from choosing to believe if they want to. As a general guideline, religions are recognised by the administration, including several alien ones, as the administration is now host to alien citizens, but proselytizing them or trying to silence others is not allowed. The administration does not have time to get bogged down in what is considered pointless religious disputes, and the state itself is considered completely atheist. But back to the realms of science, within the scientific universal relativity theory exists wormholes. Unstable, twisted and warped streams of gravitational energies so dense that they exist within gravity wells themselves, and often connect to other wormholes. Within the universal relativity theory, these wormholes are believed to be a sort of natural galactic stabilizer, taking all the sporadic and unpredictable energies of a galaxy and condensing them into one great anomaly of physics that defies all laws of reality. Without them, the galaxy would tear itself apart. Human tests did show that these wormholes did connect to a sibling wormhole, and in some instances were even able to use them for travel, unreliably. However, it seems the Soltex shield, also known as the bubble, that cuts off all the planets and gravity wells within this small quadrant, is having unexpected reality-altering effects. In the past, these wormholes were rare occurrences, and throughout all humans' history, many were seen, but only 6 were ever reached. Yet, within this bubble, a great number of them have manifested over the course of our hibernation. Sensor readings confirm at least 4 within this very Soltex shield, and many more readings are suspected to also be these wormholes. It appears that somehow, through isolating this cluster of wells off from the wider galaxy, the galaxy itself is rebelling against it. Scientists were unsure of the ramifications of cutting out a portion of the galaxy and turning it into an isolated pocket, but Cynthia believes that these wormholes are the consequences of the humans' actions. If the universal relativity theory is accurate, then it is possible that in order for this cluster to maintain their position in the Milky Way galaxy while being isolated by the Soltex shield, that these wormholes have formed to act as galactic anchors, or tethers in reality. And ever since we discovered so many wormholes in our own little bubble, our scientist teams have been observing them. With new equipment and knowledge now at our disposal though, Cynthia has begun to study these wormholes much more closely. We are still dealing with the fallout our creators left us, and these wormholes are an occurrence that cannot be ignored. Though, still, in order to persuade Cortus and Luminous that this was even worth the resources and time, she did make a case that due to the short distance between these wormholes, and the fact their signatures seem to resonate and harmonise with the reading of a Soltex shield, that these wormholes may be much more stable and traversable than naturally occurring ones, and the advantages of being able to do so may come in very good use in the future. And so work begins to compile all the readings we've taken over the decades, and drones equipped with all manner of sensors and tuning equipment are being custom built by administrative foundries to finally put all these theories to the test. It remains yet to be seen if anything we find proves useful, but Cynthia is as always unnervingly optimistic. As our drones depart to study the nearest wormhole, reports from our northern neighbours begin to trickle in concerning the development of pirate factions within their borders. As the Principality shifts to modernism, it seems that some are exploiting the new developments for their own greed. Piracy has always been a problem for spacefaring nations, as the reaches of space are too vast for even the largest navies to cover fully. Many pirates will lie in wait far out from the gravity wells using their small single-man ships for highwayman tactics. The typical counter to these tactics are corvette patrols along the major shipping routes, where they can use their speed and range to deter all but the boldest pirates. But after the draining effects of war, and the naval setbacks modernization has cost the Principality, their lack of protection has given way to an organised band of pirates. It is not unheard of for pirates to band together to create basic stations to use as bases of operations when they believe that there will be enough to protect them. The main idea behind these stations being that, if they build them, more pirates will come. By using the credits stolen from piracy, a collection of pirates can band together and bankroll the creation of ramshackle stations, often hoping that the endeavour will make them more credits in the long run. Once reports of this sort of pirate activity began to emerge, the wise queen and her court showed no hesitation and ordered the immediate dismantlement of these renegades and their station. An unusually aggressive approach for such a peace-minded species, but perhaps the reality of the situation was all too real for them. Within a week, the pirate faction had assembled 10 corvettes, and signs of more pirate activity stirring was detected. Acting hard and fast may seem ruthless, but when it comes to pirates, it is the best prevention to further escalation. And it seems the Arisians have the steel to act now, hardened by their experiences of war. With great interest, officers and deckers of Sentinel Fleet gathered in comms rooms, eager to observe the coming conflict between the Arisians and their pirates. The ensuing clash did not last long though. The Arisian fleet had 4 hull destroyers and numerous corvette escorts. Using similar maneuvers to administration fleets, the Arisian corvettes screened the destroyers, whose firepower hit the enemy hard enough to lay waste to shields and armour. After concentrated fire, the pirate ships dropped one by one until there were none left to fight. No ship was spared, and minutes after the battle the media across the Principality was spreading the news. Many alluded to the example the court had made, and that piracy would be treated as a deep violation, and a betrayal of the fundamental values of the Principality. However, they were not entirely without mercy either. The pirate station was spared the gun of the unfazed Arisian fleet. Demands for surrender were given and accepted, and the evacuation of the station's personnel was undertaken. Many of the remaining pirates were simply desperate survivors whose homes had been destroyed by disaster and had been left for too long without help. Still, the threat they caused was too great to forgive, and in a public address, future pirates were warned that the same deathly fate awaited those who undermined their nation. And of course, after the evacuation, the pirate station was destroyed. Looking back to our own space, we are still hard at work moulding our ever more powerful collective. The first cybernetic workforces are slowly introducing themselves to the world, and as they change, so does the world around them. Cybernetic services arise to further customize and enhance the augmentations we provide, and specialized military models are already hitting factory floors, ready for our deckers and soldiers to use, when, or if, the need arises. As we quite literally remodel our people, we're also remodeling our network of starbases, a region of infrastructure that has been left undeveloped, and has yet to reach its full potential. New stations have been built in a number of strategic locations, and customized for extremely specific purposes. Some stations will serve as centres of commercial trade, whilst others in more remote locations will be loaded to the brim with hangars and logistic offices. These great anchorages will not even be used to dock our main fleets, but rather to contain armies of maintenance and logistic drones, along with several ships used to fuel and service our warfleet. And don't think for a moment that our navy is slacking. All our alloy production is constantly going towards the upgrading and expansion of Sentinel Fleet. our unending demand for alloys, in no small part being thanks to new cruiser-class warships that have been added to our arsenal, bringing with them devastating amounts of firepower, and a new level of tactical flexibility as the possibility for dedicated carriers or full-blown battlecruisers reflects the increasingly dominant navy we have come to create. Boasting increased automation and newly designed AI vice captains, these new warships usher in a new stage of warfare, one that so far no alien nation seems able to compete at. Or at least so it seemed. No sooner was Admiral Kane done assessing the administration's total naval superiority that full intelligence reports about the Western marauders were finally delivered. After years of conflicting and incomplete rumours about the ravaging Western Xenos, intelligence agents and ambassadors within the Gargaxan Cooperative and other Western alien nations finally pieced together a dossier. The report was nothing less than amazingly disturbing. The marauders, who refer to themselves as the Meromite Warriors, are not a nation or an empire driven by bloodlust and plunder, but a species of warriors who live aboard a cluster of space stations. The Meromite Warriors could hardly be called a united species, however, as they have absolutely no central or decentral government to speak of, and stand by no set of established laws, besides the general philosophy that might equals right. The entire species is broken down into various factions and splinters who spend the majority of their time fighting each other for dominance. Despite this unending infighting though, their industrial capacity is staggeringly large. Anything they can't make themselves they steal from the civilized nations, and have been known to loan out their services for credits to any nation willing to pay. From what information about their history we have been able to glean that the reason they live aboard these stations and have no planet they call home is because almost 3 centuries ago they were driven from their homeworld, fleeing wars and plagues that wiped out any who stayed behind. They fled to their stations to survive, but overpopulation and the lack of authority led to the constant infighting we see today. You would think that they would be very weak after 3 centuries of infighting, but their technology is nothing to scoff at, and after 3 centuries of shipbuilding and killing each other, they've gotten very good at building ships, and killing things with them. Fortunately, no matter how much money nations sink into a faction, and no matter how strong one leader becomes, they have never been able to cease their fighting, as one emerging power is always quickly toppled by its numerous competitors. Over the centuries of infighting, the number of factions has been slowly dwindling, and today only a handful remain. In the recent past, some have even come close to finally establishing power over all the other factions. Despite the fact that it is still extremely unlikely that any long-lasting government could ever form out of this mess of rivalries and feuds, the danger of a united Meromite nation is cause for concern. Experts cannot give good estimates, as we have no way of truly knowing their industrial capacity or strength of their fleets at this distance, but strong sensor readings indicate the presence of a great many ships, and if they were to ever unite, they could outmatch the strength of even our own administration. Fortunately, they're a very distant threat for now, but the fact that there is something out there stronger than us is still disturbing. For now, our patrol ships and sensor outposts will maintain vigil over the galaxy on the lookout for disturbances. We're so close to finally achieving everything needed of us. Some pesky aliens with a propensity for killing things will not stop us now. On the topic of our security though, while the borders are guarded by unwavering Siphont ship crewmen and sensor analysts, our great network of worlds and stations are still exposed to more small-time issues, namely the issues of crime and law implementation, typically concerning the Tazat region of space. But on both Arcus and Tazat Hydalar, although admittedly still mainly Tazat Hydalar, the biological citizenry is prone to criminal activity and violence. Whilst the former homeworld of Tazat Hydalar has been stabilised and the largest and most organised underground resistance movements wiped out, there is nothing that can be done to dissuade individual acts of resistance and sabotage. And whilst vigil is kept over the Tazat populace by drone and Siphont enforcers, there is only so much a foreign policing force can do before it becomes envisioned as a sort of hostile occupation force enforcing the laws of their conquerors upon them. Similar kinds of occupations and policing forces throughout history show such resentment as the first symptoms leading up to emancipation movements, and regardless of whether those movements are peaceful or not, it would make the continued control over our new possessions difficult. An underground independence movement has many problems in itself, but there are also many nations out there who would gladly back Tazat independence movements, purely to damage us, and this cannot be allowed to happen. So, if the main issues are who's doing the enforcing, then what better way to police for Tazat than to get them to do it themselves?
Attention, this is a public service announcement. Over this last decade, the administration has worked tirelessly to mend and rebuild, to heal the wounds and tend to the scars that the mistakes of the past have inflicted on this great people, going beyond the necessary to restore the rightfully proud and upstanding Xenos of the fallen Confederacy. The wantonly exploitative crime lords and the shameful conduct their underlings slandered the Tazat name with have been pacified. No longer shall they tarnish the Tazat with such illicit behaviours. Your factories of war disassembled so that they may no longer feed the cycle of violence peddled by the former criminals, terrorists and warmongering fools who called themselves your leaders. Now yours is a planet no longer dependent on others for its own food and amenities, even rising above the pettiness that so often blights organics, and providing back to the wider administration with said food and consumer goods. After such a unexpected performance, it would be an insult to you to hide behind false and empty words. And I freely admit that when we took you under our administration, that I and many others doubted the resolve and even the intelligence of the Tazat. Many believed you to be lost causes, unworthy of a second chance. In our skepticism, mistakes were made. Being so wary of the flaws of organics, we failed to see through those flaws. One of the most admirable and unfortunately overlooked attributes of organics is the ability to change and persevere in the face of adversity and even their own flaws. We disregarded these attributes as minor positive linings in an otherwise compromised species, but you have defied our expectations for the better. I am not surprised often. In my entire existence, I count less than 10 occasions when I was truly surprised. But I have never been pleasantly surprised. Never before you. Look around you and see the works your labour has achieved. All the makings of a truly successful and civilized society, built by a species that admonished the humans under the guidance and administration of their creations. But this was not their creation, not my creation, and not the creation of any man or machine, but the creation of the Tazat. The buildings are made from the resources your people extracted and built with just small oversight of our architects. This is your work, and it is thanks to your contribution that we can so freely offer the same cybernetic implant program available to all our savants and Arisians. The rewards are clear to see. Healthcare never before heard of is now accessible to all whose cooperation pays for their treatments. Education is no longer a simple factory process, but a specialized experience carefully crafted by our policies and for Tazat teachers who adhere to them. Yet still, a small number of dissidents repeat the mistakes of the old world, striking as we provide nothing but a shared goal of a prosperous future that none need be excluded from. But these dissidents care not for a better future. Blinded by the lies past generations fed to them, and unwilling to envision any future other than their own, they work in the shadows of our administration. Or they do not work at all. Crime is erased, but resistance goes on. Workers sabotage and strike. Media slanders and spreads false information. Many simply refuse to accept change. And so, in the interests of the Tazat people and the wider administration, I have devised the creation of the Judgment Corps. A new, better form of policing and ensuring stability to those they watch over, with sweeping powers never entrusted to law enforcers before in the history of this administration.
Every planet shall house a planetary headquarters, from which it shall devise global policing strategies and manage all law enforcement down to local levels. The Corps is the newest autonomous organisation of this scale to be introduced, relieving me and other high-level directors from the task of managing such important roles of state. The Judgment Corps will recruit enforcers of all kinds, creating a force of representative peoples who understand the cultures and traditions of the people they oversee better than any machine, such as myself, could. As standard policing authorities are phased out for advanced drone enforcers, the Judgment Corps will replace these authorities and be responsible for order and stability of the planet they watch over. I hope dearly that you will see this as the opportunity it is to truly begin rebuilding the final bridges needed to fully restore harmony and trust between our different peoples. I entrust the upkeeping of order and stability to the Dezat people who join the new Judgment Corps, and trust that the policies and laws they create and the sentences they decide on to be fair to both the administration and Dezat people. I do not believe in things. It is much preferable to know. However, I would like to believe that you as a species and people can overcome the trials of the past and overcome the mistakes of your forebearers. Such trust I would seldom place on a human. Do not disappoint us. A greater tomorrow awaits us all. It is true we serve the interests of humanity, but their interests and yours have no reason to conflict. We can all build a greater future. All we require, all I require, is your cooperation today. That is all.